I am David, King of Israel, the shepherd boy who slew Goliath, the man after God's own heart. My victories are celebrated in Psalms, my reign praised in history. But my story is also one of failure. Failure so profound it brought shame, death, and the wrath of the Almighty upon my house. Let me tell you the story of Bathsheba, the darkest chapter of my life. Hear it from me and let it serve as both confession and caution. It was the spring of the year, the season when kings go to war, but this time I stayed behind in Jerusalem. My armies, led by my trusted commander Joab, were laying siege to Rabbah, the Ammonite stronghold. I had fought my battles, won my wars, and thought I deserved a moment to rest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city grew quiet, I walked onto the roof of my palace. From there I could see the city spread out beneath me, my kingdom, my people. But that night my gaze fell on something, or rather someone, that would change everything. There she was, bathing on the rooftop of a nearby house. The fading light of day reflected off her skin, and she was beautiful. I couldn't look away. I should have turned back, gone inside and prayed for strength, but I didn't. Instead, I lingered, consumed by her beauty. I called for one of my servants. "Who is that woman?" I asked. He hesitated before replying, as if warning me. "She is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Uriah, one of my mighty men, a loyal warrior who was even then fighting in my army. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Desire clouded my judgment. I gave the order, "Bring her to me." When Bathsheba came to the palace, she was as radiant up close as she had been from afar. I spoke to her and she seemed shy, almost uncertain. But I was the king and my desires were law. That night she became mine. I told myself it was just one night, that no one would know. She would return to her life and I to mine. But weeks later, a message arrived that shook me to my core. I am pregnant. Panic set in. Bathsheba's husband Uriah was away at war. If the truth came out, my sin would be exposed and her life could be ruined. I had to act quickly. I sent word to Joab, "Send Uriah the Hittite back to Jerusalem." When Uriah arrived, I greeted him warmly, pretending to care about the war. "How is the battle going? How is Joab? How are the men?" I asked. Then I gave him leave to go home, thinking he would spend the night with Bathsheba. If he did, everyone would assume the child was his, but Uriah didn't go home. Instead, he slept outside the palace with my servants. When I questioned him, he said, "The ark, Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." His loyalty, his honor, was like a dagger to my heart. I had to find another way. Sire, the next night I invited Uriah to dine with me. I made sure he drank until he was drunk, thinking his inhibitions would weaken, but even then he didn't go home. My plan had failed. Desperation consumed me. I wrote a letter to Joab, a letter sealed with my royal seal, and I gave it to Uriah to deliver himself. The irony still haunts me. Uriah carried his own death warrant. The letter read, "Place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." Joab obeyed. During the next battle, Uriah was sent into the thick of the fighting. When the enemy attacked, Joab's men pulled back, leaving Uriah exposed. He died, just as I had planned. When Bathsheba heard of her husband's death, she mourned for him. I watched from a distance, waiting for the mourning period to end. Then I brought her to the palace and made her my wife. She bore me a son, and I thought I had escaped the consequences of my actions. But I was wrong. God had seen everything. God had... One day, the prophet Nathan came to me. He told me a story. There were two men in a city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing, except one little ewe lamb that he loved dearly. When a traveler came to the rich man, instead of taking one of his own sheep, the rich man took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his guest. I was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Nathan's eyes burned with righteous anger as he said, "You are the man." His words cut deeper than any sword. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from Saul. I gave you your master's house and wives. I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. Because of this, the sword will never depart from your house. I was shattered. I fell to my knees and confessed, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin, you will not die. But because you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. And he did. My son with Bathsheba grew sick, and I fasted and prayed, begging God to spare him. But after 7 days the child died. My heart broke into pieces. I had thought I could hide my sin, but it had brought death and devastation to my house. Though my sin was great, God's mercy was greater. Bathsheba and I bore another son, Solomon, whom the Lord loved. He would go on to become king and build the temple of God, but the scars of my sin remained. My family was torn apart. My sons turned against me, and the sword never left my house. Yet through it all, God remained faithful. If I could go back, I would choose differently. I would turn away from that rooftop and fall to my knees in prayer, but I cannot change the past. What I can do is tell you this. Sin, no matter how small it seems, grows like a wildfire. It consumes everything in its path. Learn from my failure. Seek God's wisdom, not your own desires. And never forget, his mercy is vast, but his justice is sure. Let my story be a warning and a testament to the unfathomable grace of God.